For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited trainings.
Hello and welcome to the Snowbrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, professional mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of Snowbrains, and I just skied for the first time ever in El Chalten, Argentina yesterday. It's been a lifelong dream of mine to ski here amongst the Fitzroy Towers in Cerro Torre, and yesterday did not disappoint. I skied great corn snow above an aquamarine lake with nonstop views of the Fitzroy Towers. It was surreal. It was one of the coolest days of my whole life. We just got done ski guiding in Antarctica, and we're headed back down to ski guide Antarctica again next week. And this is what we decided to do with our 11 days between trips. I've been truly blown away, mostly by the animals. Flamingos, rheas, black-necked swans, guanacos, foxes, and more. This place is truly incredible. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Brian Head Resort. Lift tickets are as low as $29 at Brian Head Resort, located in southeastern Utah. You'll also enjoy a free $10 resort credit on select dates. Use your corduroy cash on resort restaurants, snow tubing, ski lessons, and much more. While supplies last, get $29 lift tickets with a bonus $10 corduroy cash, only at brianhead.com. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by 11.8. Not ready to compromise on quality, fit, or function? 11.8 ski gear is designed by athletes for athletes to feel like a second skin, infinitely comfortable to ski in, dependable, and protective when nature shows its harshest side. Technical ski gear that allows you to discover the mountain without compromising. Designed and developed in Åre, Sweden. Discover this year's collection at 11.8.com. My guest today is Zahan Billimoria. Zahan is a fully certified IFMGA mountain guide who has been the guide for many of the famous TGR movies, including guiding Jeremy Jones and crew on the legendary 13,000-foot Grand Teton in Wyoming. TGR even ended up making a full movie about Zahan called Solving for Z, which we'll discuss here on the podcast. Z has some speed records in the Tetons, including the Grand Middle South Teton Ski Link Up in only 10 hours and 39 minutes, which is insane. He's the founder and CEO of the Samsara Experience, an online training resource and community, and more. Zahan was born in London, grew up in Switzerland, and has been in the Tetons since he graduated from college. Hello, Zahan. Welcome to the show. Thank you so very much for being here. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. It's middle of the summer in Jackson. Life's busy, but life is good.
And so I always ask this, and it's been a while, I know, but when did you ski last?
My last day of skiing was off of my bike in the Grovant range. I couldn't tell you what the date was. We had a very dry winter, followed by a very wet spring. And then as May and even late May wore on, the mountains were caked, and I could ride my fat bike into the backyard range. So my last day was with my friend Fred, and we just raged around the Grovants.
Love it, man. Nice. Well, Z, I really want to dig into your guiding, your process, because I think it's really special. Your work with TGR and your fitness company, Samsara. So we're going to start off with this rapid fire questions, and we're going to dig into some of your deeper stories. How many days do you ski per season?
I imagine probably around 100 days. I think it's less than it was, say, 5 to 10 years ago, when really I couldn't find much purpose in a day if I hadn't skied. And I don't know, probably feels like 5 days a week, I would guess.
How many of your days are backcountry days?
About 100%. Right. Yeah. I need to much at all. For me, skiing is about, it's about wilderness. It's about fitness. I love the work. I love the riding. I love the freedom, of being outside of a regulated environment. I love that freedom. So yeah, skiing's a backcountry thing for me. By and large, though, I must say, I had a Snow King lift pass, and I volunteer for an organization called the Coombs Foundation that gets young Latino kids into the mountains. I love that organization. I love getting to hang with those kids. So we ride the lifts together a little bit, and I probably rode the lifts another, 5 to 10 days just on the local local small hill right here in town called Snow King.
Love it, man. What do you think is your biggest accomplishment in skiing?
I think that my biggest accomplishment is being alive, is having survived it all. The one part of the question that maybe like gets at me a little bit that I think I would express differently is I don't feel like it's an achievement, to be honest. I think that a lot of it is luck.
Right.
If I'm honest, I think a lot of the reason that I'm still alive today is because I'm lucky and he wasn't or she wasn't, you know. Maybe that's my biggest achievement is being lucky.
I hear that and I see that and I agree with that. I feel like when I look back on how my introduction, my beginner years of quote unquote mountaineering, there was a lot of luck involved. I had a lot of close calls, a lot of silly decisions. So this could reflect a little bit on the previous question. What do you think is your biggest accomplishment in life?
I think like what I care about the most, like what pulls at me the most is being a dad, right? Like that's what really matters to me the most. That's like what my greatest sense of purpose is in life is like, wow, somebody out there decided that I should be a candidate for raising children. Or, you know, I mean,
I love it.
let's go. I think feels more important and more purposeful than raising my kids. You know, both my kids are in high school now, so I'm really in the twilight year of being a dad. And so I spend a lot of time reflecting on these young people that I've hopefully prepared for the world. Living that like kind of duality of life where you have this very intense, very immersive personal passion around the mountains, which is very consuming, right? Like we all know that how much like the mountains can demand of you and consume you, even when you're not in them. The preparation, the thought process, the anxieties, the stress, the information gathering, like all of that, mountains just can eat up so much of your life. So part of maybe what I feel like I'm so grateful for is that I've been able to do both.
And congratulations, man. It's not an easy game to balance those both. How do you define yourself?
I'm a dad. I'm somebody who's deeply passionate about the mountains and the wilderness experience. I care a lot about the state of the world and social justice. And I'm just absolutely crazy about like using my body to do cool shit in all different ways. So, you know, I'm an athlete. I think we're all athletes, but I'm an athlete. I love that part of my life. So, yeah.
Where's your favorite place to ski?
I can't say that I would link like skiing with one single favorite place because so often, I think most of the time, skiing is about exploration, right? So like the place that like gave you that first experience when you first ventured there, it's going to be different the next time because of all of the known factors that were unknown to you before. And I love exploration. I love being in an environment where things are new and they're fresh and that's very demanding of you. It creates a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of your own like skill set and thought process that you've got to bring to the equation to solve the puzzle. And for me, I like that puzzle aspect of being in the mountains a lot. So like I have certain like favorite memories or like great memories, but may be of places that wouldn't have the same impact for me if I went back now.
What if we had to pin you down and say, what might be your favorite mountain ranges?
Well, I mean, I'd have to say the Tetons, you know, because I decided to build my whole life here, right? And I love the fact that the Tetons are a human-powered range. So every person that you meet up there, even when it feels like, oh, it's getting more crowded, which it absolutely is, when you get up there, there is this like kindredness amongst the people because you're like, hey, you had to work your ass off to get here too. And that builds like a sense of like shared experience, you know, and I like the fact that the Tetons are ubiquitously that way. Like if you want to ski in the central part of the Tetons, there are no lifts to get you there. You're going to have to like work. You're going to have to just like immerse yourself in the environment for many, many, many hours. And it's never going to be a place where if all you care about is just shredding power and going downhill, it's never going to be the best place for that because you're going to have to put in such a disproportionate amount of work to get there. And I like that. And then we get a lot of snow. The Tetons are very like intricate. They're very complex. I like that aspect too. You know, it's like very much of like there's so many nooks and crannies around here. And that's a rad part of it.
Absolutely. My understanding and my experience is it's a 2-mile flat walk just to get to the start of the mountain. And then that has to be done in reverse a lot of times. So the Teton, the barrier to entry is high. And so I agree. When you get out there, everybody there is pretty dedicated. And that does make it a special place. What would you do if you couldn't ski? Your body's still fine, but for whatever reason, skiing is not an option.
I'd compete in mixed martial arts.
Oh, is that something you do as well?
I haven't competed, but I am like totally in love with mixed martial arts right now. Yeah, totally. So like if I hadn't been a skier during my 20s and 30s, and I that would be like the other thing that I think could just completely consume me in the way that big mountain skiing did.
That's very cool. In all my research about you, I did not come across that, man. That's very cool. Mixed martial arts for Zahan. I love it. What scares you the most in the mountains?
Avalanches, point blank. That's the easiest question you've asked me so far.
Yeah.
So that one I don't have to hesitate on. Lightning is very scary too in the summertime, and I sort of have a similar relationship, I think, with lightning and avalanches in the sense that like you can learn, you can study, you can amass all of your experiences, you can have mentors, you can make good decisions, you can be a good gatherer of information, and you will never ever close the gap on risk. It will always be there. The mountains will continue to surprise you in the worst and ugliest ways. Your confidence can be all time, and the mountains can just shut you down and blow your mind. And that's not always fun. And avalanches are a permanent reality. I've, spent my whole life trying to understand snow, and the biggest mistakes that I've made around snow have happened in the last 5 years, not in the previous 20. So yeah, avalanches scare me.
They scare me too, man. And we'll dig into that a little bit more. What do you love most in the mountains?
Like the two words that come to mind for me are like freedom, total freedom, right? Because like there's not really any rules in the mountains. In a human-powered mountain environment, it's like there is no trail, there is no right and specific way that you must go up and you must go down. Like it's all about like creativity and interpretation, and just like you get to do it the way you want to. And I love so many different ways of being in the mountains. I really love climbing. I really love distance running, but none of them offer that just like untrammeled canvas and just like go wherever you want, do this how you see fit, that skiing does. So I love that aspect of it. And I love the wilderness aspect, which of course is connected to that, but I just love that sense of like when you're deep in the mountains, like the only track that you see is yours, the only sign of human passage that you see is yours, and it's raw. I love that rawness of the wilderness environment, the quiet, the solitude. I just think as like a human species in 2022, there's never been a time when we have been more disconnected from nature. And as a backcountry skier, you just like soak that in. You just like immerse yourself in that rawness, that wildness of like the wind's blowing, cornices are forming, it's cold, the weather's changing, it's just like, wow, this is so raw, and that makes it so sick. So I think that's a huge part of like what makes skiing so magnetic to me.
Damn, well said. What's the funniest accident you have had in the mountains?
I was working at Teton Village at the time. I was in marketing over there.
And that's where I met you.
That's right.
We skied together. I was like, oh, I'll ski with a marketing guy. This will be lame. And you crushed me in the moguls. I was just battered and bruised at the end of that. Anyway, continue.
I've never considered myself any good in the moguls.
Oh, you killed me a hell of a lot better than me.
Well, I did get to ski there a lot, right? I did get to ride that tram a lot, so that surely helped. But the coolest assignment I got while I was working the village was that TGR was going to shoot a segment in the newly designed stash parks, which are these like cool, naturally built terrain parks, had logs and sticks and all that stuff. And so they shut the stash parks down, and there were two athletes that were coming. It was Chris Benchetler and Sage.
Wow.
And my job was just to show them around, like point out the features. So we set up, it was dumping. We set up on a couple of features, and I remember like watching the guys just like grease these landings and just like tree tap and just do all of this really sick movement. It was just so like elastic. So like I just like I've been standing there watching these guys hit this feature over and over again. And as soon as they pulled the cameras down, I was like, dude, I've so got that. That looks pretty chill, actually. And I remember it was this big tabletop feature. It's off of Casper. And I hit it with speed. And I just tried to do this like cool little butter move that I'd seen Chris Benchedler do. And I completely botched it. I'm surprised I didn't concuss myself, or maybe I did, but I knocked the wind clear out of my lungs. And I was laying on my back, just like gasping for a breath. And I remember both guys like running up to me and being like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Like, I watched the catastrophe go down. And yeah, it's one thing to walk slowly up mountains. It's a whole nother thing to like grease pillows and do all the cool shit that these guys do in the film. So that's probably my funniest moment.
That is great. I love that story, especially to have, those caliber skiers watch you do that. You try to fit in and hang out.
I did.
It's so fun. I randomly skied with Sage at Sage Catabriga Alosa at Jackson one time. And we were both skiers for Atomic at the time. And I remember we switched skis and he gave me some newfangled ski. And it was so fun. But the same thing, it was like he was in a bouncy castle. And I was trying to do what he was doing. And I couldn't even do. He would just do like a shifty off of a little bump. I just couldn't replicate it. They have something that very few people have. It's really special and it's cool to see it live, especially.
It's so fun to see it live. That was such a privilege of like working there and being around those guys, because it just opened your mind up to a whole different way of like interpreting the mountain. It's cool.
Absolutely. So we'll flip to the other side. What might be the scariest accident you've had in the mountains?
I've had so many terrifying accidents. I mean, I've been fully buried. I've been fully buried.
What is that like? I think that would be interesting for our audience to hear, because we always hear about the full burials, the worst case scenario. What is that like as a person who is buried?
It's all about mindset. It's all about your headspace, because when you become entombed in the snow, like you can't wiggle a finger. You can't move any part of you. And my mouth was crammed full of snow. It was in my eyeballs. It was shoved up my nose. Like at first I didn't have any breath, and my arms were pinned very far away from my face. And I don't have all the reasons why this happened this way. But for me, as soon as I had that experience, I realized I need to accept this. Like, I've got to get to an emotional or like mental state of like total, complete acceptance. Because what you want to do is you want to scream. You want to just fucking scream. You want to lose your mind. It's like somebody is just on top of you and they're controlling you entirely and they're killing you, and so you just want to fight so hard. But like, there is no fight. The fight has ended when you're buried, right? You had fight all the way through the avalanche, but when it sets up, like, it's not a time to fight anymore. And any fight will not only dramatically reduce your chances of survival, but it will also, or I fear that it would also permanently destroy me psychologically. And I moved to Driggs in 2003. And the year I moved there, this guy, I won't say his name, I don't even know if he's still around, but he got buried in an avalanche the year I arrived. And he survived, but he'd been buried for a very long time, I think about 12, maybe 15 minutes.
Whoa.
And I didn't know him well. He left. But what I did know is that, like, psychologically, he never recovered.
Which is understandable.
Is absolutely understandable. Yeah. And I think in that moment when I was buried, I realized that. I realized, like, like, if you struggle now, if you fight this now, like, this, it'll crush you. It'll crush your spirit. Like, it'll be a very hard road to recover from. So for me, I just got into this state of like total acceptance. where I just kept saying to myself, like, I've been avalanched. I'm buried. I'm like deep. I didn't know how buried I was. I wasn't buried very deeply at all, actually. I was buried very close to the surface, but I didn't know that. But what I did know is like, I'm buried. And I just kept telling myself, like, you made a mistake. It's okay. You made a mistake. You triggered an avalanche. Now you're buried. And like, I either will survive it or my friend will dig me out, but it's okay. And for me, through so many of my close calls and accidents, my experience of it has been like just deep frustration with myself. How could you let this happen? Why didn't you think, why didn't you see it coming and all these types of things? And most often those thoughts come to me in the moment of surviving the violence of the moment. And I feel this like, dang it, why? How? What were you thinking? Like all of those thoughts. And in this moment, I realized like, no, that's not helpful. That's not helpful right now. You've got to accept that this is your reality and it's okay, And in the moments after that happened, I just became much, much calmer. And I started discovering things like, oh, there's this little passageway in my cheek where the snow isn't quite as plastered to the inside of my cheek as it was a moment ago. And now I can like whistle in this little bit of air. Oh, wow, I just got a breath. Wow, thank God. That felt really good. Let me try that again, And then moments later, I discovered that while my whole body was completely locked up, this one hand was actually, oh, wait a minute. This hand is free, not the wrist. The wrist was locked up in the snow, but the hand was free. And it started opening up these different possibilities. And then I was able to, like, with my fingers, claw towards my face. And I don't know if I would have ever gotten my airway cleared. I can't tell you, but because I was recovered before that. But none of those windows of survival, of opportunity would have been available to me had I been in the state that I was in when I first got entombed, and I had this burst of panic. Like you only see black, you see nothing. You're just terrified and so gripped. Yeah, the experience for me was just all about like learning about just like accepting.
That's heavy, man. And how long do you think you might have been buried?
I don't know.
But
I really don't.
But your friend got to you.
Yeah, my friend got to me. I imagine that in the grand scheme of things, I imagine it's pretty short, perhaps 5 minutes.
Wow. But I think that's something for us to remember. They always talk about once you do get entombed to relax. And, I think that your strategy of acceptance and really digging into your awareness sound like that was really helpful for your psychological experience through that.
It really was. And it was enormously helpful for me afterwards. Because I was able to like make peace with that event in my life. Yeah.
That's huge, man. And we mentioned Driggs earlier. That's Driggs, Idaho, which is just west of the Teton Mountains in Wyoming. This is a tough question, but I think we need to talk about this stuff more. And I know that you're good about talking about this stuff and open about talking about these challenges. How many friends have you lost in the mountains?
I mean, I don't really count them, but half a dozen of like truly close friends, I would say.
And it's not an uncommon answer. A lot of the people we talk to here, it's around a dozen. And so, well, thank you for sharing that. And we may talk about more about that moving forward. And you mentioned that you were in an avalanche where you were totally buried. How many avalanches might you have been in your life, in your career?
It sort of depends how you classify being in an avalanche, because sometimes you have the experience of like triggering the slab, you're standing on it, and then you make a quick move and you're able to escape it. Does that count as being caught in an avalanche? Like,
that's tough. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, those moments are very easy to brush under the carpet because you naturally feel heroic. You feel like the mountain take me, but like I was able to like do this ninja move and I escaped it. And those kinds of moments can, if you don't process them with a lot of like humility, I think they can be very, very dangerous because they lead you to feel like, oh, so I can get avalanched. And it's, if I'm such a good skier and I'm so this and I'm so that I'll survive. And, you realize, or I've realized through my experiences that like, no, that was luck. That was luck. You were in the right place at the top of the slab. You were in the right part of your turn and you were able to just stand up and there was space for you to exit. And then there's other avalanches where I can remember being just so very, very close to safety. Like, like the avalanche that's featured in the film Solving for Z, where I was actually wearing a helmet cam. Like you can see in that avalanche that I triggered it at the very top. Had I been 4 or 5 feet higher, I would have just stood there and watched it. It would look like a ski cut. But instead, I was 4 to 5 feet too low on the slab, took the ride, So I think, I have had, probably about 8 of those types of accidents where it was, touch and go and extremely close, some of which I got drugged with, some of which I was able to ski off, and, some of which I had a feeling about, stopped and triggered the avalanche right where I stopped, and it triggered right below my feet, and it would have been fatal, not just for me, but for my whole group. It was massive. So, avalanche, we can have very different experiences of what it means to be caught in an avalanche. Some feel heroic and some just feel like you just feel like a fool. You just feel like, I don't know what I'm doing out there. I don't belong out there. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm being caught with my pants down. I'm just caught off guard. So, yeah.
That's great. No, it's really, really strong insight. And have you ever been hurt while skiing?
I have been hurt while skiing. Yeah. Really only once.
That's huge. And what was your injury?
I destroyed my shoulder.
Okay. So that's what I saw in the video. Yeah. What was the injury?
I tore all of the muscles in my rotator cuff and separated my shoulder from its socket. Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So you've been on ski trips all over the world. What was your favorite ski trip?
I think I would say, there's always a recency bias. We tend to remember the highlights most recently. But the last trip I took before COVID, my friend Ben, my friend Fred, and I all went to Bolivia.
Oh, wow.
On a trip. And that was all time. I mean, that was just so much fun. We flew into La Paz and we had our sights on peaks all up and down the Cordillera Real. So what we did was we used La Paz as a base camp, and then we would do these short 5-day, 6-day expeditions, set up camp, focus on one peak at a time, and then come back, tear it down, come back, reset, and then go again. We did that for 3 weeks. I think we skied 5 different peaks. We didn't summit. I think we only summited 1 or 2 of them. Numerous ones became extremely close and had to turn around for different reasons. But we did a ton of skiing. We actually had amazing snow.
Yeah, because usually the snow is not that good. These are really high volcanoes, 20,000 foot volcanoes, and the snow is often just rough and wind blasted.
Right, totally. And, we had 1 peak that we skied in perfect corn. That was super sweet. That was our first mission. And then we had POW for 2 of the biggest mountains that we skied. We skied in very, very shallow, 3 to 4 inches of perfect POW, which really is as ideal and as friendly a big mountain condition as you can have, right? Because when it gets deep, it's rad, it's very cool, but that gets much more scary and complicated because so much snow has to move. As soon as you start disturbing that snow, it's just going to start running, and that really complicates things. So having that glued on 3 inches of POW, wow, that's as good as it gets. And yeah, somehow we struck gold with that and just had incredible skiing and just incredible cultural experiences. And I lived in Chile 20 years ago. I traveled through Bolivia. I work with the Latino community here in Jackson. I have a very strong connection to Latin America. So for me to be back down and connecting with the people, and we met the guides over there. There's a whole young crop of young mountain guides who are crushers, and we got to ski with them a little bit, and we were able to pass along our skis and kit to them, which like was kind of a seed that I think really started their like sort of ski mountaineering interest, because these guys were all really badass alpine climbers and guides. So yeah, it was such a sweet trip. That's one that I think I'd like to go back.
That sounds like a legendary trip, and just I think might be interesting for our listeners to know. Like La Paz, where you base camped, is I think it's over 12,000 feet, the capital city there. So pretty solid base camp. You're not going to lose your altitude fitness, which is great. Is there anywhere you would not go back to?
No, I don't think there's anywhere that I would like say I'm never going back there. But there are places that I think, you know, I've skied Chamonix a lot because I grew up very close by, and you know that's such an attractive place to go skiing. You see the photos, you know, and when you start to understand like what the lifts can do over there, it's mind blowing. But that's a place that like I've have less interest now than I did before, because just the pressure is intense, and for me, I really, at this stage in my career, 20 years in, I'm like, I know what I really love about the mountains, and it's really ultimately it is that wilderness aspect and the camaraderie of the friends and those elements. And so I tend to seek places that, even if they do have some lift serve aspect, which if you go to the Alps, there's a lot of lift service going on, I still want there to be some type of wilderness vibe to the experience. Like Le Grave can really provide that. I love that place.
That's funny you say that, because it's relatively similar for me. I went to Chamonix thinking I was an extreme skier, and I left knowing that I was not. Chamonix scared the hell out of me.
Yes.
I was there for like a month, and I've not been back. I don't really plan to go back. It's just it's busy, it's heavy, it's scary. But a lot of respect to the people who do spend time there. Is there anywhere that you haven't gone skiing yet and you'd really like to ski there?
Yeah, there is. You know, my family's originally from Shimla, which is northern India and formerly part of Nepal. And, you know, I've had kids throughout my whole career as a skier. My kids are in high school now. So like I had my kids in my 20s. So I've never had a time when I didn't have kids at home, and doing expeditions to places like the Himalaya just never felt that reasonable, because of, I like being around my kids, you know, my family, my wife. And so there are certain places where I don't think I have any interest in like high altitude, 8,000 meter skiing or anything like that at all. But like to go and be able to, you know, ski from valley to valley and ski some of the 6,000 meter terrain, you know, and stay in the small villages and connect with, you know, where my mother's family is from. That's something I would very much like to make happen in my life. Yeah.
That sounds sick, man. What's your favorite ski movie of all time?
For pure athleticism, it's got to be anything that Sammy Carlson is in.
Yes.
Most athletic skier on the planet. And I just love watching that kid ski. He's a friend. I've gotten to ski with him in person, and it's just ridiculous. You know, any Sammy Carlson movie, how about that?
No, that's a great answer, man. I got to ride the chairlift with Sammy last year, and he's also a really nice kid. So yeah, I agree. What he does on skis is phenomenal. So yeah, look up a Sammy Carlson movie. They're all good. His latest stuff, especially, is nuts. Now, you know, now that he lives up in Canada. What challenges you the most intellectually on a daily basis?
I think it's knowing myself. You know, I think that's like been the journey. I mean, you know, so 3 years ago, I had this huge accident and came home. Oh, I think it was something like March 11th, right at the start of COVID, right? And my shoulder was torn to pieces. I ended up having a very serious back injury. And I spent the next year rehabilitating my body. And for the first 6 months of that, I was confined to laying on my back all day. And when I'd stand up, I'd get this electric pain that would shoot down my leg, sometimes one leg or the other. The muscles in my back get so tight that I'd have to lay down again. So I spent 6 months of my life laying down. And that was the hardest, most uncertain period of my life. And I think when I look not just back on it, because I feel like that journey that begun in that time is very much still alive for me now in lots of wonderful, wonderful ways that I'm really thankful for. But it's like I realize how many layers I had to uncover to understand myself, why I do certain things, why I feel a certain way when somebody says a certain thing, why I attach myself to certain parts of my identity or whatever it is. But like, I think that's really what stimulates me the most, is like making peace with myself, with who I am, with the mistakes that I've made, with the things that I'm good at, with the things I want to become good at, with areas that I see like, oh, I could really grow there. I could let go of that. I don't need to be anxious about that. I don't need to have frustration about that. I could let go of that. So like, yeah, that would be it. I think knowing myself.
And that's intense. 6 months on your back. Yeah, I had sciatica last year, which sounds like you had some of. And if people haven't experienced it, I hope you never do. I would never wish it on anybody. And it's really frustrating because your body's not actually necessarily damaged in that spot. It's just that it's touching that nerve and it's just shooting down your leg. And I had to go get drugs. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. I really only had it bad for 3 days. So to have it for 6 months,
Good.
man, I'm glad and impressed that you came back from that. That's freaking gnarly. What's your favorite book or favorite books?
My all-time favorite book series would be the Lonesome Dove series.
Nice. Cowboys.
Yeah. I don't know why, but that story like really, really captivated me. And I've read it like over and over again. I think maybe I have like this like romantic notion of living in a time when the world was much simpler than it is today, and just the kind of exploratory kind of nature and the way those guys lived really like spoke to me and connected with me. A book that I read recently that would be a great recommendation is called Endure by Alex Hutchinson. And it's all about sort of trying to decipher what are the limits to human performance and how elastic are they, how capable of change are they. That was a great, somewhat recent read.
That's great. I actually selfishly asked that question, to be honest. I cherry pick a lot of these books. So I like Johnny Mosley had me read Breathe, and a few other folks that have recommended great books for me. So I Endure that. I'll put that on my list because that sounds like something that would be fascinating.
Yes.
So my last rapid fire question is, who's inspired you the most in your life?
I'll go with Mahatma Gandhi. I grew up in an Indian family. I grew up in Europe, grew up in Switzerland, but my parents are both from India. My father grew up in India. My mother grew up traveling around Europe because her father was in the Navy. My parents were born in the late 40s, which is a time when India struggled for independence. And so I grew up with these stories of this man dressed in loincloths who had a vision for the world that was different than the way the world was. And he was just a man who would not be denied. I think I connect with that story. I think I always have. And I mean, in so many ways, like his sense of like knowing himself, I think was just truly remarkable. And his sense of like mission and purpose with his life, also truly remarkable. And he gave birth to an independent nation that, has very much struggled to live up to his vision, but it wouldn't be what it is without the great Mahatma Gandhi. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that answer. That is unique, and I stimulates me to want to read another book because I know there's great books about Gandhi, and I don't know enough about him. So I will put that on my list as well. Thank you, man. So let's get into some in-depth stuff here. And I think just the way I laid this out, there's too much to talk about with you. But I wanted to start off just making it clear about your ski mountaineering skills. I think your ski prowess as a ski mountaineer is nearly unmatched. And I want to just kind of just talk about some of this, almost in a list format here. So you have 13 ski descents off the Grand Teton in Wyoming, which in my mind is very hardcore via 4 different routes. And so 13 seems ridiculous to me. Z, who has the most ski descents on the Grand?
Oh man, I was about to say that Thanks for that. But the truth is that there's a whole new generation of guys. They all work for Exum. And these guys are on such a different level than I ever was. Adam Fabricant, Nat Murphy, Clark is just, and I mean, Adam certainly would have the most. I think he's approaching 40.
No. Oh
yes.
my God.
Yes. And via numerous other routes, Adam skied like the Hussock McGowan twice now.
Whoa.
The Otter Body, just, I mean,
Well, what's
yeah.
it like? What's it like skiing the Grand? You know, because I look up at that thing. It's all no fall zone. It's all exposed. It doesn't exactly go right. You got to do a rappel or something. Tell us what it's like to be up there on skis coming down.
To be up there on skis coming down is sweet. It's amazing. You're 1,000 feet higher than any of the other peaks, and they're all pretty big. And you know, via most of the routes, the skiing is reasonable. It's not death-defyingly steep. And when you're skiing down, presumably you came up the way you went down, which is what most people are still doing. So you have some familiarity already. And when you click into your skis, like it's really fun. It's really, really fun. But the overall experience of skiing the Grand has changed a lot because there is no mountain anywhere in the world that I've ever seen or heard of that is as badly set up for crowds as the Grand.
Bottlenecks.
It is not so much the bottlenecks, more the avalanche hazard. Because, you know, the upper, say, 1,500 feet of the Grand are massive snowfields, huge. The east face of the Grand's like half a mile wide. The Ford couloir, we call it a couloir, but it's not. It's just a massive half pipe of snow. So the volume of snow that's holding on to the upper reaches of the mountain is enormous. But when you climb it, you have to climb via these gullies. And these gullies are essentially choke points for any crystal of snow that falls off anywhere on the upper mountain. And if it does, it is not going to stop until it goes through those gullies and flushes out the cliffs below. Whoa. So it is truly a miracle to my mind that there has not yet been a fatality on the Grand, unfortunately, because it has become such a dangerous mountain. When you're climbing, let's say that on any normal day nowadays, there's going to be people above you. So that means that, you know, you're at risk for all of the shattered ice as they're climbing through the pitches of ice that are going to come down, clack you in the head, knock you off. That's one risk. Then as they get up onto the upper mountain and they're booting, you know, if they kick anything off, that's going to come down upon you. And then when they click into their skis and you're still coming up, whatever they send, even if it's not an avalanche, just like the slough that comes off a single turn, that will flush you down. So like, and then it sort of reverses where you summit and you start skiing. Then at that point, they're going to be on rappel. And when you're on rappel, there's no place to hide. You are right in the funnel. So whatever you send down, it's going to land on them. And the chance of you sending down enough snow that gathers momentum and then hits them like a wall, it's just so high. And I've seen some terrifying things happen up there where people were within, and I could say this with no exaggeration, just inches from losing their life, from like enormous slough trains and pure avalanches, wet loose avalanches coming down. So skiing the Grand is sweet, but the whole experience of it, you have to time it very perfectly. And by that, I mean, you have to be on the mountain when there's nobody else there, or else you have no control over your own survival, really.
And nothing's more terrifying in the mountains than the objective hazard. And that at this point would include other people kicking stuff on you because you have no control of that. Right. How much has it changed traffic-wise? You know, let's say how many people are skiing the Grand now versus 10, 20, 30 years ago?
You know, I couldn't tell you really. I mean, I first skied the Grand in 2005 with my friend AJ Linnell, who's no longer with us. Great dude.
I'm sorry.
And in those days, there was very, very, very few people in Garnet Canyon, let alone on the Grand, and you certainly were not going to ever see anybody else on the mountain. That was for sure. The mountain probably saw, maybe a handful of descents, and I imagine I know that many winters went by when there probably weren't any descents. Nowadays, my guess is that the Grand probably sees, this is just a guess, I really don't know, but I'm guessing it sees 100 successful descents on a low year and probably 300 to 500 on a high year.
Holy shit. I thought you were going to say 100 on a high year. Wow.
Right. That's my guess. Yeah. I mean, no, it's
busy.
It's busy, man. It's just such a desirable, iconic ski experience for any ski mountaineer in the US, right? Like
arguably the most iconic in the lower 48.
Yeah. I would have to say it's the most iconic in the lower 48. It's that like test piece that as a young ski mountaineer, like at some point you're like, I have to go and see if I'm capable of that, because that's the whole package. It's the climbing and the, you can carry a lot of gear. It's a big day, 70,000 feet. And, I got to learn how to ice climb, and I got to be able to make quick transitions to rappels, and there's steep skiing and there's avalanche hazards. So like it's everything. And that is just going to draw people for sure. Yeah.
Scary, man. Well, thank you for that insight, because I think that we're also interested in it. And I agree. As a young upcoming mountaineer or guide or ski mountaineer, that would look really good on your resume. So it's sort of a must do in a way. But obviously we need to think about all these dangers that come with it, especially now that it's busy. You also have, my list is going slowly. You also have over 10 Grand Traverses. So tell us what a Grand Traverse is. I don't even know what that is exactly.
Right on. Grand Traverse is it's a long ridge walk, really. You start by it. I've only done it in the summer. Rennie Jackson and Mark Newcomb and some other guys did it in the winter. I think that's probably the only time it's been done in the winter.
Wow.
But in the summer, it's a very moderate, really, alpine traverse. But what makes it maybe not so moderate is just that you are on the ridge crest for a really long time. And it's just a ton of terrain, a ton of moderate terrain. So you end up climbing up Teton. That's about 6,000 feet of fourth class to the summit. And then from Teton, you're just going to follow that ridge all the way over to Mount Owen, to the Grand, to the middle, and then to the whole southern portion of it. And no single move is difficult, but it's a real adventure. There's so much route finding, and you're managing a terrifying amount of loose rock, as you generally tend to on a alpine ridge traverse.
And just nonstop exposure, huh?
Yeah, for sure. It's nonstop exposure. Yep. It's a journey, it's a whole odyssey of just like really immersing yourself in this sort of summer alpine, rocky, craggy, ridge crest environment. And I've done all of my Grand Traverses guiding. So we do them in 2, but more commonly 3 days.
Wow.
And that's moving. Like even 3 days, like if you're providing security for somebody, that's just like 3 full days. And it's amazing. Super cool.
Sounds like a gorgeous, exciting, and maybe even terrifying at times experience. And I think Odyssey was a great word for it. It sounds like a true Odyssey. And you also have multiple speed records in the Tetons, and one including the Grand Middle South Teton Ski Link Up in only 10 hours and 40 minutes. And I assume this is where you ski the Grand Middle and South Teton all in one go. And I'll just rattle off a few more. You got first descent of the northwest face of Mount Sampson in Canada, first descent of the North Peak or the north face of Bivouac Peak, and I think that's on the Tetons. The first descent of the East Core and Veiled Peak in the Tetons, and obviously much more. And so my first, maybe not my first at this point, but my first question here around all this is, what drives you? What drives you to climb and ski these intensely gnarly, pretty high consequence peaks?
Well, there was definitely a period in my life where I was super driven to really deliberately choose things that had a lot of risk, not because I didn't value my life or because I wanted to do things that were deliberately dangerous, but because risk experiences are just really memorable, right? They're really they leave a mark. They are so intense. But like right now in my life, like, man, I'm in a different place where like risk will always draw me in. It's always, I think, something that makes the experience rich, but I don't have like the courage and the aptitude for skiing on the cutting edge like I did 10, 15 years ago. Like I'm so, and I think that, we were talking earlier about the idea of like knowing yourself. Like that's part of my knowing myself that's happened in the last few years. It's been really, really liberating to be like, I don't have to be the same person today that I was yesterday. Like that's part of growing as a person. And I look back on that, I'm like, man, that was so fun. That was such a cool part of life. And in those days, like I would wake up just trying to chew my arm off every day. Like, how could I go bigger? How could I do more? How can I train harder? Like, how can I scare myself more? And like now that's not what I see. Occasionally I do really like those big experiences. Like there are still days when that everything feels right and I'm like, yes, let's go. I got the right crew, I'm in. But that sense of like wanting to be driven towards that day in and day out, no, that's changed.
And it's some of the most intense, I don't know, I think rewarding and especially with other people, with other human beings, bonding experiences that we can have in life. I think sometimes what we do in the mountains, we get a similar bond to what maybe soldiers get. I think what soldiers get is even stronger, right? Because they do, but we have things akin to what soldiers experience out there, and which makes me wonder, what was there a focal point, or was there a moment when you changed, when you decided, hey, I'm going to take it down a notch?
Yeah, I think it's an accumulation of events because the reality, which, I cannot explain and package nicely, but the reality for me is that I've had more accidents in the latter part of my career than in the early part of my career. And you would think it'd be the opposite because in that early part, there were so many gaps in my knowledge. I had far fewer experiences to draw on, but I've really seen how there is no solving the puzzle of the mountains. They will never become simple. They'll never become understood and like able to be calculated. And for me, I think now I have really had to journey through the loss of like people I really cared a lot about. For me, I look back on my friends who have passed, who have left children and wives behind. And it's like, how do I honor that? Like, how do I, when I think of them and I think of like, what conversation would Luke and I be having? What have I learned? Like if Luke asked me, like, what have you learned through all this, and I'm still behaving the exact same way I was before, I feel like that doesn't really honor their passing. It's like, well, your life didn't really matter. I just carried on the exact same way. And I think for me, seeing the aftermath, on planet Earth of what life's like for families and friends and the community that you leave behind, it is definitely helped me recalibrate what do these experiences mean, which experiences are worthwhile, how many of them do I need to have. And it's ongoing. And that's, I think, the thing with the risk is that like your relationship to it, it should change. It should evolve. It doesn't have to live up to other people's expectations. And I say this like really for the young guides out there, because as a guide, especially in the Tetons, your identity gets so wrapped up in your ability to take risk, and your willingness and your skills in that high risk environment is very rewarding because like the community sees you as like somebody who's able to do these things that other people can't do. So you get very attached to it. And that attachment is a problem. That's a risk, because ultimately like that's a moment in time. And over the course of your career, you won't always live in that moment of being in a place where that's what you want to be doing, and you living on the edge of your risk tolerance is the right place for you to be.
Well, I think that's a beautiful and profound, articulate way to say it. It was when kind of speaking with somebody who's passed, which I do all the time, and asking them, what have I learned? What am I doing now? How am I making this better? And you mentioned your friend Luke, and I think it was your other friend, maybe Steven. Am I correct there?
Yes.
That had a fall while you guys were out climbing and skiing in the Tetons in Wyoming. And I am, curious about that too, because you talk about that in your movie, Solving for Z, a TGR movie made about Zahan. I think it's all part of what we're saying here. And how did that accident, when you lost Luke and Steven, how did that change you?
I mean, I completely lost interest in the mountains.
Right.
I completely lost interest in the mountains right after that happened. The mountains really just became like a very dark place, very ominous place, a very like unpredictable place. And when you spend your whole life, professional life, developing like a way of understanding the rhythm of the mountains, the patterns, and being able to predict based on those patterns, and then something that you absolutely did not see coming happens. For me, the experience was, okay, well, then I don't know anything. I have no idea what I'm doing. Wait, how the hell did that happen? There was no part of me, straight up, like there was no part of me that anticipated that. I wasn't thinking like, oh, this is a possibility. This may happen. We should act accordingly. And so as a result, like it shook me and my confidence enormously. And it was really like 6 months before any like interest in going back to those types of places came back. And really, like even the winter after that, I remember being very unsure and cautious and timid going into the mountains. I went to La Grave for the first time that next winter. I remember realizing like, wow, yeah, no, it's not the same anymore. Like the thing that, I'd look from a distance, look at a feature and say, oh my God, that looks so sick. I want to go ride that right now. And then I'd go and I'd be on there and I'd be like, but it's not as I thought it would be. This isn't the experience I thought I was going to have here. Like that was really part of that journey. And then, as the years went by, I slowly regained confidence, but it's not the same, and I think people would commonly ask like, are you good now? Like, do you feel good again? Like, are you psyched to be back? And it's like, the answer to that is complicated. It's like, yeah, I mean, I love the mountains. I'm psyched to be back in the mountains. But if you're asking me like, am I like back to the same as before? Like, hell no, absolute no on that one. Like, and I don't ever want to be the same. Like, I don't ever want to have a near-death experience, lose 2 friends, and then be like, okay, we're good. I'm the same again. That would just show a complete lack of ability to grow and adapt. And for me, it would be like a lack of empathy too for the loss. So for me, it's just ongoing. It's just ongoing. To me, I feel very, very open. That is how I describe myself now. Like, I have no attachment to like, I have to do these badass things. I have to take this much risk. Like, hell no, I don't. I'll do whatever feels right. And when I feel timid or when I feel unsure, I'm just going to be the first to admit it. I'm going to be the first to get on the mountaintop and scream like, I'm not too sure about this. I feel like I need to back off. Like I've been able to really detach myself from that identity of having to be the guy who acts in a certain way, who's always got the confidence, because that's how I was in my 20s and 30s. I was always the guy who went, I just always tried to find a way through, I guess. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm great with that. I'm very comfortable with that. And that feels nice, So like I can take risk when things really line up.
And I think that's a gift. You didn't say this exactly verbatim. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But in my experience with loss in the mountains, I've gotten better at turning around. Which I think is part of what you're getting at is, I don't have to push through. I don't have to ski the scariest thing. And I think that's what a lot of people who experience loss go through. And I like the way that you've approached this. I like the way that you feel and empathize about this, because I think when you do see, and this isn't a sound judgmental, but I'm trying to be, analytical. When you do see people who lose friends in the mountains and they don't make a change, I feel like those people end up on a crash course to be in a bad accident again. And I think it really is an important call a call to arms in a way, with your mentality, with your psyche to, hey, we have loss here. We can still enjoy the mountains, but we do have to change how we do that. And I think it again comes back to what you said. This is going to resonate with me that, how would you answer these questions from your friends who aren't here when they ask, what have you learned and what are you doing differently now?
Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast was brought to you by 11/8. 11/8 was founded by professional skier Sarah Rundgren and professional mountain guide Jimmy Oden. They wanted to create the best ski gear. So in 2010, they founded 11/8, designed in Åre, Sweden, combining the free skier's playful spirit with the mountain guide's uncompromising attitude towards gear. Tested on the mountains of their doorstep, with decades of skiing and curiosity going into every stitch and detail. Find your favorites at 118.com. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Brian Head Resort. Did you know kids aged 12 and younger ski free every day at Brian Head Resort? Brian Head Resort is located in southeastern Utah, where Little Rippers ski free, no purchase required. That's free, F-R-E-E. Learn more at brianhead.com. That's brianhead.com.
I wanted to talk to you about diversity in the mountains. I just had Henry Rivers on last week, who is the president of the National Brotherhood of Skiers, is sort of a generally an all-Black organization who skis and gets together and does a lot of good for diversity in skiing. And it sounds like you're associated with the Coombs, I think you called it, foundation. That looks like they're working on diversity. And you are a person of diverse background. So I'm so curious, what has been your experience around diversity in the mountains? And have you experienced any exclusion or bad vibes or racism in the mountains?
I think the reality is that, like any person of color, has experienced racism in the mountains. It's just inevitable. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's told you to go F off or like deliberately excluded you, but it does absolutely mean that like mountain culture is white culture. So it's just inevitable that if you're not a part of that culture, if you don't look like you belong there, then your experience of it is going to be tailored by that. And that's, like, I spent 20 years, I spent my whole life in the mountains as a brown person without ever really understanding what it meant for me to be brown here.
Right.
But really the thing that for me changed everything was the George Floyd moment. And in the time that has passed since then, it's completely opened my eyes to like the depth of racism really in America. I mean, I was always aware of it. I really was. But like now I've gone back in my own life and dissected so many moments, so many things that have happened that I never understood before or that I never thought were important. And now I can see why I've had certain reactions at certain times. And the reality, is that mountain culture is white culture. Anytime you are in a place that's all white, it is inherently racist. There's a reason why America looks the way it does of many racial backgrounds, and yet a subculture looks completely different than that. This doesn't make sense. Why would mountain culture be all white when American culture is brown and Black, and white people are almost the minority? You would never think so in the mountains. Mountain culture has always been connected to privilege in America and really around the world, right? Like the freedom to recreate and to build a life around recreation is a freedom that's really historically only been afforded to white people.
Because one thing that makes me think of is you talk about, you kind of going back, and I think that's so enlightening for you and for us to hear, right? Going back through your life and like, wow, I had these experiences that were strange. Now I see a little bit more, because it's pretty clear to most everybody that it's systemic racism, right? It's really in the foundation of our country, of our constitution, of everything we do. And then agreed, that's something we don't talk about enough too, that mountains have been very exclusionary. So even a very sort of white privilege, more elite, group of people in a lot of ways. And one thing I think that we unfortunately have done to people of color is othering. And I know you know about this in your experience, I'm sure. And I had Eddie Taylor on this show, who's part of the all black group that went to Everest called Full Circle. And he said one of the things that happened to him that he genuinely thinks the guy was trying to be nice, but it was just such an othering. He was on the chairlift and the guy looked at him and said, "Congratulations, you're the first black person I've ever seen on a chairlift." And while in that person's mind, maybe they were trying to be friendly, what they said is, "You are an other." And that really struck him. And I think that that's something that people of color experience, unfortunately, on the regular on the mountains.
Yeah, it's so pervasive. It's just it affects every aspect of your life. Like if you live in a mountain town, you live in a white society, and that affects everything. It affects how the cops treat you. Like I've lived in the Tetons for 20 years, right? Both sides of the pass, and forget the mountain culture, like just the valley culture. My friends see a cop car pass, the emotional reaction is completely different than mine because I have a lifetime of fearing the cops.
Wow.
For really good reasons. Like I know that the cops are not my friends. I know that I have to watch out because all you need is one racist cop. He's got so much power. And I've experienced that over and over again in my life. So like to me, here's the thing for me, right? Like I'm 44 years old. I'm well established. I'm well known. Like my life is freaking awesome. I have no concerns about like those realities for me because like I'm good. Like I'm in the movie. I've got this thing, whatever. Like people know who I am. Like I'm not the problem. But for me, I have this massive sense of responsibility to smash the wall for the next generation. And that sense of purpose for me is wicked strong. And it's everywhere. It's when I see ICE come to town and start rounding up Latinos. It's when, I see the cops looking around in the corners, and it's when I see the way that people look, so this weekend I had one of the most radical experiences as a brown person ever in the mountains. I'm part of this organization called Coombs, which has helped bring these young Latino kids into the mountains, teach them to ski, teach them mountain bike, teach them to climb, do all this rad stuff. Well, a couple of years ago, another organization popped up called Camina Conmigo. And Camina Conmigo means walk with me. And it's a group of Latino adults who in the pandemic went out on a hike because they couldn't work, because our Latino community, they are the workers. They are the working backbone of Jackson. They hiked up the Sleeping Indian and they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And now they're on a mission to bring all of their friends along. And so now they've got this radical Latino hiking group that is going all over the Tetons, storming all over the place, developing the skills, learning first aid, getting their fitness, all this stuff. So cool. So they invited for me to join them on the biggest hike of the summer. We were going up Table Mountain. It's like 14 of us brown people wandering around the mountains on the trail. Like I've never, ever in my entire 44-year life in the mountains from childhood to today ever been a part of an all brown crew just cruising around the mountains. We didn't speak a lick of English all day. It was just like, whoa, my God, like the world is changing, not just in society, but also in the mountains. And, like it's not that anybody is going to be rude or disdainful, but you can tell that people are like, huh? What's going on here? This doesn't make sense. I don't blame them. It doesn't. You've never seen 14 brown people walking around the mountains before. You've seen groups of white people walking all over the mountains, never bat an eyelid. But like that's sometimes what racism can look like is, wait a minute, you don't belong here. I mean, I'm fine with you being here and all, but like, you don't belong here. This isn't your natural habitat. This isn't what you people normally do. Right. And
even questions like, what are you folks doing here?
Exactly. Yeah. Or here, like, where are you from? Because you can't possibly be from here.
Right.
Well, why not? I mean, half of America isn't white. Why not? Well, because you're in the mountains. This is not a brown people type of place. And you're just like, you're right. It's not. But guess what? Now it is.
I like that. I love that. Well, that's a very interesting, challenging situation that we all face. I really appreciate you sharing that story with us. And it's something that we get better at. And I love that you are helping with that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that organization and if there's anything we can do to help?
Camina Conmigo is just now becoming an organization. So up until now, it has been a group, well, it's been a couple who are around my age, who raised kids here, who are hardworking Latino members of the community, who were just bringing their friends along. And now it's booming. There were like 14 people on the hardest hike of the summer. They want to climb the Grand this summer. I'm like, awesome. I want to guide you up the Grand. That sounds epic. So like,
Yes.
we're just, I know, right? So cool. So what's next for Camina Conmigo? I think we're going to need, we're going to need to build a little supply cache of boots and jackets and backpacks and just reduce all the barriers to like, do I have the right equipment? Because that's a huge barrier. It's a financial barrier, but what struck me with being with my crew out there was like how many times they asked me something to the effect of, what are the rules? What are the rules when two people pass each other on the trail? What are the rules around this? And it just made me realize, like, yes, it makes so much sense that you would worry about the rules because you believe you are in someone else's house.
Wow.
And you want to know what their rules are because this is not your house and you feel that. And I'm like,
wow,
no, dude, this is your house. You belong here. This is your space. And part of that is just like, it's all the little things that people who grew up with parents who taught them to, go to the swimming pool, go hike on the trails, do all that normal kid stuff. Well, if you didn't grow up with that, you feel like everybody else is playing by a rule set and nobody told it to me. I don't know what those rules are. So the biggest thing you can do is when you see them, like, welcome them, high five them, give them a hola, ¿qué tal? Even if you don't speak great Spanish, it doesn't matter. Like, make it normal, make it awesome for them to be there. Celebrate their presence in all the spaces where you see them. And then, we're going to need to start supporting and, paving the way to make it easier for them to come into the mountains. But the raddest thing about Camina Conmigo, and something that I can tell you is truly cutting edge and is very, very, very rare, is that this is not a white initiative to bring brown people into the mountains. This is brown people bringing themselves into the mountains. And that's rad. Like, the emails that you're going to get beforehand, they're all in Spanish. Like, this is not for white people. It's for Latinos by Latinos. And that is so cool. So for me, I'm trying to take, like, the Latino culture is very near and dear to my heart because they're the closest people to me here in Jackson, but I'm not Latino. So I'm still like wanting to make sure that they're the ones that take the step and they tell me what they need, not me come in and say, okay, you guys, you need this, you need that, you need that. Like, I really want to leave all the power with them and just be like a connection to the white community, because that's the community that I've always been a part of here in the mountains. And I know that within my friendship group and like my community, when they start hearing that there's a Latino community asking for support, we're going to give it to them 100% because people want to see them in the mountains. And that's just exactly how it should happen. I'm so glad it's not something that, we have started or, a white organization started or some white nonprofit. It's like, no, this is Latinos for themselves. And yeah, but something that, people should be contributing to and can really support is the Coombs Foundation, which is now in its 10th year. Coombs has single-handedly transformed the face of mountain culture in Jackson, period. Now you'll see Latino kids at the crag. You'll see Latino kids on mountain bikes. You'll see Latino kids swimming. You'll see Latino kids at the bouldering park climbing, and you'll see them all over the ski hill. There's also room for white-led organizations who are paving the way to open the doors for Latinos, which is what Coombs is, and they're just doing a tremendous job. They are the most important, in my view, most important nonprofit in Jackson Hole. If you want to support meaningful work that will transform the face of the outdoors to the next generation, you gotta get involved with Coombs. Support them, volunteer. They're awesome.
Well, we'll get up an article about that on Snowbrains because we'll help
Very cool.
do everything we can from our point of view and from our side of things on Snowbrains. But we'll try to get that message out to other people because I love that too. I'm just about in 2 days, I fly down to Argentina for my 12th season down there, full season. And I love Latino culture. Wow. I love speaking Spanish. I love those people. Mexico is my favorite country in the world. Personally. And I just, that it's so warm and welcoming. Within 10 minutes of meeting these people, they're inviting you to their house for a barbecue. They have something really special that we don't have in white American culture that really makes me feel good. And to be honest, I feel more comfortable in Argentina, just as a human being, than I do here. And when I come back, I'm almost sad because nobody's hugging and kissing me. And, the way that they just behave, there's something really special about that culture specifically. And so, yeah, I love seeing them out on the mountain. I love that you guys are helping get them out on the mountain and that they're helping themselves get on the mountain. That's the best part. So I definitely want to keep in touch with you about Camina Conmigo and we'll talk more.
Very cool.
And now I want to just jump into, because I think, a mountain guide is in a lot of ways a golden god in our society, especially in mountain towns, and especially people who don't see the mountains that often. The clientele that comes, it's hard for them to understand, who you are and what you do. And so let's just start at the beginning, and we'll blast through this. What made you want to become a mountain guide?
I grew up in Switzerland, and so I was surrounded by mountains. Like even from my bedroom. And from our house in the distance, you could see snow-covered peaks. And I came from a culture where it's just like what you said, that mountain guides are like revered.
Yes.
They're honored. They are like seen as like a different species almost,
Yes.
So I grew up with all of that lore. And when I was 17, I was graduating high school. I'd been in the mountains for 2 or 3 years. We'd climbed some, significant features, for young people in the Alps, but I'd had many, many mistakes, and I knew that. I found myself like in over my head numerous times. And then when I was 17, I was graduating from high school, and all of my friends were going to Ibiza, which is like this island off the coast of Spain where you go to party your brains out after college, after high school. My parents were like, "That's a waste of money. We're not funding that trip." And I was so bummed, of course. But they were like, I tell you what, like, why don't you go and do something in the mountains with a guide who could teach you, and then we'll pay for it. So I was like, okay, that's good compromise. I'm down. Long story short, I ended up being paired up on a private trip with this guy, Christophe Profit, who is a legendary French guide who's all in the magazines, who had come back from a trip to Pakistan. He climbed K2. He had enchained the 3 great north faces of the Alps. He had done all these groundbreaking things. He was a legend. And when I had the opportunity to climb with him,
wow,
I remember going into the mountains with him. And I remember the complete ease with which he could just navigate the whole thing. The way he was able to interpret the environment, the way he was able to choose the passage that we would take to, meander around these hazards, and then how slick his system, like everything was so clean and like elegant. And that flipped a switch. That there and then I was like, okay, I've got to figure out what is it that this guy has learned, and how can I learn it? And that was it. Like when that happened, it was lights out. I was on that path. That 17 years old, hadn't graduated high school yet. Went to college in the Northeast near Boston. Nowhere with big mountains, but I never let go of that like vision that I had from that day with Christophe, and I followed that to Jackson, and eventually became a guide.
And a fully certified guide. What was the hardest part of that certification process for you?
The hardest part really is dealing with the egos and the power that people have over you. Your instructor, they have all the power. So you really have to play a certain game to get through that. And it's very stressful, is what I experienced.
No, that's not the answer I expected. I thought it'd be something technical. So, and I
I know,
this is something,
yeah.
this is something I talk about with my friends and friends who guide quite a bit And I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Why do mountain guides often have large egos?
Look, I mean, you said it yourself, right? Like when society bestows upon you this incredible regard and all of this respect, then, that's a narrative that you're going to be attracted to. And you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. So I see that like the rest of society just like bows down to these people and they think that they have this whole otherworldly ability. Here's the thing, right? Like every human being on the planet that you meet, they have a skill set, they have a set of abilities, they have talents. And when you're a guide, all of these talented people come to you in a world in which you are talented. And so you get to show off all of your talents in a world that's absolutely terrifying to them, but very desirable. So you get to be a hero every day of your life. And you show up at the job and you say, come with me, and you hold the rope tight, you wander all over the mountains, and they're quaking in their boots thinking, holy shit, is this thing an avalanche? And you're like, don't worry, it's fine. And it turned out fine. And, it's very, very easy. It's so easy to get lulled into believing that you really are all the things that your clients believe that you are. But I always think like, well, what if we flip roles and I come into the bank tomorrow and we've got to make these really high consequence decisions on trading stocks or some whatever that you do, or like you're a surgeon or you're a trial lawyer who's going to go and like stand up against these large corporations or wrongful death and this and that. Like it's easy to see ourselves because these people are all coming into our world and they're all such intelligent, capable, wealthy, successful people, and they all think you're a superhero.
Yeah, I mean, you could have answered it more just perfectly for me, because that's sort of been my answer in a different way. Because I remember my first real guiding job was on Mount Rainier, and I'm just walking up and down this hill. It's pretty mellow, and the clients, it's the hardest thing they've ever done in their whole life. And so you get down at the end of the day, you're having beer, you're having pizza, and they kind of ask you, what are you going to do tomorrow? And you answer, I'm going to go climb Mount Rainier again. And it just blows their mind. To them, it's just, you're not human, like you said. And they say all these very praise, they shower you with praise. And I think, eventually it gets in your mind and you feel that way. And because like you said, other people are great at all these things they do, like banking and investing and other things. But there's a very few jobs out there where it's life or death. And so that, I think, takes it to another level as well. But don't listen to my answer. Listen to Z's. That was a very cool, articulate answer. And I very much agree with you. We'll transition that right into your high-level guiding. I love that you guide professional athletes. You guide for TGR, Teton Gravity Research, which is a film company out of Jackson in Wyoming that does amazing ski and snowboard videos. And, just from seeing your movie, which TGR also made, Solving for Z, you may have been the one who approached TGR about filming in the Grand Teton Park. Is that right?
I think that is right. Yep.
And how did that conversation go? I love you. I could just picture you walking up to Steve or Todd, the owners, and saying, hey, we should film in the Tetons in the park. Let's go.
Yeah, man, that's pretty much exactly how it happened. I think it was about 2009, I believe. And I was working at the Village at the time. And I knew that my days there were numbered, that like it was no longer providing for me what I needed. I had both my kids by then. And the Village had been a nice, stable job.
And not to interrupt, but the Village means the ski resort, the Jackson Hole Ski Resort.
Right. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, you're good.
Correct.
Yeah.
Jackson Mountain Resort.
Yeah.
And it had given me an opportunity to meet all kinds of cool people, yourself, to get better at skiing, all these great things. It's been great. But I knew for me that it was time. And it was time to go back to that original dream that I had since I was 17 years old, and I met Christophe Brophy, and I had this vision that I'm going to be a full-time guide, not just a guide on the side, which is what I was at that time because I was working for the Village and guiding. So I went up to my boss at Exum, who is a good friend of mine, still is to this day. His name's Nat Patridge, legendary skier, great athlete, and owner of, I think probably the largest guide service in America. And I asked Nat, I was like, Nat, I think it's time for me to make a transition and I want to work for Exum full time. And he goes, I thought he was going to be like, Z, I'm so excited. He didn't say that at all. He said, I think I think you're crazy. And my jaw dropped. I was so bummed. I was like, why? He's like, Z, like, you've got it all right now. You've got health insurance, you've got a stable job, and you get to guide. And I was like, man, I'm glad it looks that good from the outside, but the reality is I'm working 7 days a week. I'm exhausted. I work 7 days a week. I guide on my days off. It's not ideal. And, I don't really love the work that I'm doing anymore. I want to be in the mountains. I want to lead and guide and be with people and share this experience. I want to live a life in the mountains, right? And he was like, look, man, there's just not enough work at this time. And this was, 2009 was a way different world in terms of the culture of guiding. There weren't really any full-time winter guides in those days, except for the ones who like worked on the tram and, did that type of guiding where you like ride the tram and then just pop out the gate and come back in. I had no interest in that. I wanted to be a backcountry guy. I wanted to be in the mountains. So, there just wasn't the interest in the culture around clients having the money and the fitness and the time, all the things to be guided in the Tetons, which is, as you said, a very kind of arduous range to be a backcountry skier in.
Definitely.
And so I came away from that conversation. It was in Mike Yokel Park. I remember sitting on the bench, and I was I was a little deflated because I had finally come to this point where I was like, that's it. I'm making the transition. And I was like, not so fast, man. There's not really enough work for you. So I was trying to figure out, well, like, how am I going to, how can I change that? And the thing that I had was I had a lot of contacts in the ski industry because of my work at the village. And Todd Jones and I were pretty good friends. We used to ski together a bunch. And so the next week, I was like, what we should do? We should make TGR films in the real mountains. Like, forget this side access thing of the tram. You've done that for 10 years. You're fighting all the locals to get to the little mini golf alpine lines. They're fine and all, but let's go and tell the true story of like the big mountain riding on these 5, 6, 8, 7,000 foot descents. Let's go have that experience, do the whole storytelling around the adventure. And popped into Todd's office, gave him the lowdown. He was like, hell yeah, let's do it. Nice. And that's how I made the transition, because then I had a job working as an expert guide for TGR, leading these trips into the peaks. And we built a crew of young guys, Griffin Post, Max Hammer, some filmers, Chris Biggenshaw and others. And that crew, we just started going and like learning how to film and capture and safely do these things. So I had to learn like how to guide that level of skiing, but also how to guide skiers who are much better skiers than I was, and how to get out, how to make the whole thing happen with the filming. Like, it was a whole learning process. So there you go. All of a sudden I had 20 days of work every winter, and we started, telling the stories.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you did that, because I think that really did change the whole ski movie space. It definitely was contagious. It seemed to spill over into other people's ski movies as well. And it's fascinating to watch. It's so much more dramatic. We've all seen the ski porn for years and years, the really cool stuff happening over and over and over. But to see these more drawn out stories of what it's like to be in the big mountains, how different it can be every day, every minute, every hour, I think has a lot more intrigue. And I give you credit for having spurred a lot of that in this industry. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for telling us the story. So of all the little projects, I shouldn't say little, of all the projects you've worked on with TGR, which one might have been your favorite?
I mean, the one that stands out the most, had the biggest impact on my career for sure, was the Otter Body with Jeremy.
Yes. And which movie is that in? It's Further or Deeper or one of the three?
Higher.
Thank you.
Higher. Yeah. So it was the third iteration of Jeremy's trilogy. And, I'd been working with TGR for a couple of years by then, but I'd worked with guys that were much less known than Jeremy. And as a skier, the truth is I didn't really understand who Jeremy was, because Jeremy at that time was a guy who had been jumping out of helicopters and riding the big lines in Alaska. And that wasn't my world, my world was like expeditions and human powered skiing and backcountry and this and that. So I didn't really understand what it meant when Todd called me, because what was happening is that we had skied a whole bunch of things, and now it was time to like go and try to ski the big dog, ski the Grand. And
Right.
as that plan started to take shape, Jeremy was like, hey, whoa, wait, I want to do that. And I want to do it for hire, because Jeremy had tried to ski the Grand a couple of times. I think him and Doug Coombs had been making plans.
Oh, wow.
And he had also been making plans prior to that with another group, and they got avalanched
Oh, wow.
on another mission and in the park, and they were like, let's pull the plug on this. So
Right.
it had been something that had been in the works for Jeremy for some time. And then he heard that, like, well, look, there's been a crew that's been working at like figuring out how to film in the park. They got a guide and the whole thing. And so Jeremy called, and he was so straightforward. I remember he was like, dude, you just let me know when the window is. Ideally, give me a couple of days and I'll be there. It was that simple. And
Nice.
very soon after that happened, I mean, this was at a time in my career where like I was so hungry. So like I just always want to do bigger and gnarlier things. And so when I heard that Jeremy wanted to ski the Grand, ride the Grand, I was like, forget the Grand, let's go ride the Otter Body.
Whoa.
Which I had not even done.
Wow.
And I was just at that. I remember those days so clearly, where like you put an idea in my head, and I would just like I was a dog on a bone. Like I would not let go of it. So,
and tell us really quick. Tell our audience really quick about the Otter Body.
Yeah, the Otter Body is this like disconnected series of very steep hanging faces off the east side of the Grand. It's just very high consequence. It's very complicated. You ski off the summit and then wrap around to the east face. You ski this quarter or half mile wide, hanging 55-degree snowfield into this choke. And it had been done a handful of times, most notably first time by Doug Workman, Doug Coombs, legendary Teton skiers. Doug Workman's still around. It was just like, seemed to me like the most prized line in the Tetons, because any photograph that you ever look at of the Tetons, you're actually looking straight at the Otter Body, just like the hanging east face of the Grand. It's just so insane. So my friend Brian Harder and I rallied up there, skied the thing. It was mind-bending, very scary, very intense, but very rad. I called Jeremy up. I was like, Jerry, we just skied the Otter Body. It was insane. You got to come do it next week. And I remember Jeremy, I think, was in Europe. He had some meetings with Quicksilver, who he used to be associated with at the time. And he just canceled everything and got on a plane. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like, okay, well, now we better pull this thing off. And there was supposed to be, the reason I thought it was the perfect window is because I had skied it. I'd been on the mountain. I'd been on that snow, and I felt very comfortable with the stability. And the forecast was for a very small little pulse to come through, and we were expecting like 3 to 4 inches at the village, maybe 6 inches on the Grand, and it would have been a perfect little refresh. We'd let it stabilize and then hit it. So that was the plan. He flew in. We were going to do it, and then
no pressure.
Yeah, I know, but it's funny. Like in those days, pressure was my friend. Like I loved. I just ate up pressure. Now, no, I break under that kind of pressure. But back then it was just like, that was my dream. I was absolutely living my dream. So, the storm rolled in, and it ended up being a mega storm, and it put down like 18 or 20 inches of snow, big wind. So we just went powder skiing, and we shredded POW. They made a whole seg about skiing POW in the park. We had a great time, but like the Grand seemed like it was the furthest thing from possible. But in my kind of dogged mentality, I was like, don't give up on it yet. And I started scouring the internet to see like what else, like what had been avalanching. And I talked to the patrol guys. I asked them where they were throwing bombs and what was going, and there had been very, very little activity. So I was like, oh, crazy. Okay. So we waited a couple of days, and I was like, look, let's just go up to the lower saddle and we'll go from there. I had another guide. We were working together. Brendan O'Neill, extremely experienced, extremely high level ski mountaineering. He had guided the Otter Body actually the week before. And first ever guided descent to the Otter Body. It happened the same day that Brian Harder and I were up there. We watched it. Yeah. So, we had a very strong team, and we went up there. It was bitterly cold, -18 at the village. That I got very serious frostbite. Different story for a different day. But we climbed the west face of the Grand, which is like not the west face, but up the west side of the Grand by the Owen Spalding, which is like a rock climb in the summer, but it has no avalanche hazard. So we summited safely and dug a whole bunch of pits. We built anchors, lowered onto the slope, stomped all over it, dug holes, did everything. We couldn't get anything to go. So we were like, all right, this is it. We committed, dropped in. And for me, like the most memorable turns of my life were when we rounded the corner, we got onto the east face. It was in the morning sun. And I made like 2 turns on belay, Bidan belayed me. And then I remember unclipping from the rope and dropping in onto the east face. And it was so deep. It was so freaking deep, and blower. And you'd think like, oh, that's so sick. And it was, but it was so terrifying. It was out of this world scary. Because you're just skiing like this 55-degree snowfield that ends in a cliff. So it's completely unsupported. And it's so avalanche prone. I've seen from the valley the avalanches this thing produces. But, dropped in, skied, blower powder right on the east face, right down to the choke. You're like hanging out on this 55-degree snowfield with a massive start zone above you. And I remember pulling out my little pin, putting it in the crack and like smashing that piton in, equalizing it, the whole thing. Anyway, we rode the Grand and it was, a really wild day, but I could never have guessed like the impact that would have on my career. And, TGR was very like gracious, I would say, in how much they featured me and the work that I did, because many guides have been working to facilitate big mountain riding for elite athletes for a long time, and they had always been behind the scenes. But Jeremy's whole mission, and TGR's in general, but Jeremy's whole thing is like, no, like we're a team and Z's a part of this story. We're going to tell Z's story and the whole thing. And because of that is really what really like put me on people's radar. And I would never have had the career I had if it wasn't for Jeremy.
That I love that last piece. And if our audience hasn't seen this, you can watch it, and the footage is spectacular. And it almost doesn't make sense. Like you said, it's this extremely ridiculously exposed hanging snowfield that's steep, and they're skiing deep blower powder, and they capture every second of it in that Jeremy Jones Hire movie. It's spectacular to watch. And I like that segue into that ended up being a really big piece of the puzzle for you as far as your career goes. Because, I mean, to me, you were one of the most famous ski mountaineer guides in the world after that. And it didn't stop there. You continued doing more and more TGR stuff and being in front of the camera to the point where they made a ski movie about you and called Solving for Z. And can you just tell us a little bit about what is Solving for Z about, that TGR film?
Yes. Well, Solving for Z was supposed to be a retrospective, or this is how I saw it. Like, and they approached me with the idea. JK, who's head producer at TGR, is like, Z, this is this vision I've got for a film. Are you interested? And the way I thought about it was like, it was going to be like a retrospective on this period of my life where I'd been taking a lot of risks and what I'd learned and the career I'd had. And I was going to be this like, sort of, person who was past the peak of his career looking back on it. And especially from the point of view of risk. But the reality is what ended up happening is I got avalanched and almost killed right in the middle of the making of the film.
Whoa.
And I hadn't had any close calls, for 5 years since then. I really, in my mind, I was very comfortable with this narrative of like, yeah, well, I used to make all these mistakes and I learned a lot from them, but now, I'm older, I'm wiser. And that's where my head was at. And we started making the film. We shot a little bit in the Tetons. And then I had a trip to BC. And during that trip, I got avalanched not once, but twice.
Oh, no.
7 days apart, both of which left me within a hair of losing my life. Yeah. They're both terrifying stories that, having to tell. And I came back from that trip broken. I torn my shoulder to pieces. and shattered, man. I was so unsure of what the future held and what am I doing? And it was clear as day to me, like, you guys, I'm sorry, but this film is off. There's no film. Like, I mean, for one, we had 7 days of filming planned. We had shot one.
Right.
And the next 6 were supposed to be right when I got back.
Right.
So one, we don't have the footage. And 2, what kind of story you want me to tell right now? Like, I don't even know where I'm at. My head is completely spun out. John Desabry and Dan Jabot and the film crew were like, Z, don't even worry about it. But if you're willing, let's just keep gathering pieces of this story. And I was like, dude, I don't know. But they convinced me. So I was like, okay. And Kim, my wife, was like, no. Now I'm done. Like, you almost died twice. Like, I don't want to be in front of any cameras. And I totally retrospectively get that. But we somehow decided to go and let them into the house, and they captured these little pieces. And, at that point, for me, both being involved in the film and coming back from this accident at the same time, it was like, if I'm going to go through with this film, it's going to be the naked truth. It's just going to be me completely raw and honest, where I'm at, no storytelling, like nothing. Like, I'm just going to tell you, like, dude, this is seriously where I'm at right now. And I told them, like, I am making no commitment to this being a film that we produce. I'm willing to record it and then come talk to me in a couple months and we'll see where I'm at. But I may pull the plug on this whole thing because I don't feel like telling a story about my life at all right now. I'm just trying to figure out, like, what the hell is going on in my life? Like, who am I and what's my future? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, we did. We carried on. We told the story, and they started, piecing it together. And I looked at it and I was like, well, that's a very honest portrait of, like, how I actually feel. And I'm good with it. Let's do that. And that was the film.
And it is heavy and it is raw. And I do appreciate so much that you did move forward with it, because the emotion is there. You can see it in your eyes, you can see it in your face, and in just how you're moving. It's an experience to watch the movie. I got pinpricks a few times watching it, especially if you have been in the mountains and if you've experienced loss, if you've been around avalanches, if you've been in an avalanche. I mean, in a way, it might have been the perfect storm, Z, because of what was going on in your life. You were able to tell a very important, compelling story. So I appreciate, and I know a lot of us appreciate that you went through with it. It's a terrific movie. It's called Solving for Z. It's free online, so definitely take the time and watch that. So, Z, you have a company called Samsara, and you folks, I don't even want to say what you folks do, but it's a fitness company. What is Samsara? Tell us what you folks do.
Yeah, Samsara is an online training company that started long ago, actually. Samsara began and was part of my career, kind of in conjunction with my guiding for a long, long time. I've had a lifelong obsession with human performance. I'm just fascinated by how the body works, how training works, and just how incredibly adaptable we are to training. It was 2005. I was just starting to really, like, ramp up my skiing and become, this sort of adventure skier that I ended up becoming, and was sort of the reason why my guiding took off. But in 2005, we got pregnant with our first child. And when that happened, it really momentarily derailed my passion for very high risk skiing. And the winter before, Alyosha was born in the summer. And the winter before, we knew we were pregnant. And my friend Jake and I went to ski in the park. And as we drove over, I lived in Driggs at the time, I had this knot in my stomach, which I'd never really had before. And I started feeling very, very uncomfortable and very anxious. And I remember we toured up Shadow Peak, and then we were going to go up this thing called the Sliver Couloir, which is pretty moderate Teton couloir. And somewhere along that journey, I just blurted it out. I was like, Jake, I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling really nervous. I don't think I really want to do it. He was like, dude, no worries, no problem. We'll just go ski something else. We did. We had a great day. When I came home, I realized, like, no, this is, like, related to my journey of becoming a dad. And I am, it didn't feel fun to go and try and do something even moderately risky. So that I knew at that time that like, I'm going to need to find something else to fill this gaping hole in my life, which is the intensity that high risk experiences provide. And that really, for me, the other part of skiing was the fitness. I just loved being an endurance athlete. I used to race a lot and I just loved that aspect of it, but I had no organized approach to my training. And there was this guy in town, Dan Struble. He's still in Dregs, really smart guy. And he was a top level US masters level Nordic skier. And I was like, I approached Dan and asked him if he would start coaching me because there's these ski mountaineering races. They look really fun. And I could do this really intense effort with very little risk. And that's what I did. So I started training. And as soon as I did that, I realized like, oh my God, training works. Like I didn't realize how like you do certain things that cooperate with your body's physiology adapts and you become way freaking fitter. I was like, no way, this is nuts. And that for me was like, it was a switch. And when I flipped that switch, I never went back. And I just fell in love with the study of human performance and how it works and why it works and what you can do and how you can become faster, how you can become stronger, how you can become more explosive, how you can, and I was a rock climber. So then I started exploring that aspect of training. And then, by like 2010, I started training athletes, most of whom were my clients. And that was really like the beginning of Samsara.
That's so cool. I love the backstory there. And you actually were on, as a side of you were on the U.S. ski mountaineering team, the national team, right? As well.
Yeah.
So it obviously worked for you. So tell us a little bit more about Samsara and what's the goal of Samsara?
The goal of Samsara, is to help athletes reclaim their innate athletic abilities. And that's ultimately that's what we believe is that the human species, who we are, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, who we are, what we look like is a product of the 7-8 million year journey of the human species from being chimpanzees, crawling around in trees in Africa to being what we look like, behave like, move like, act like today. And through those 8 million years, the only constant is that our bodies have responded to the environment we've been in. And about 2 million years ago, when beings decided that they wanted to eat meat, we became hunters. In order to become hunters, we needed to become runners so we could keep up with the animals that we wanted to run down. And we developed endurance capabilities related to our running. And along the way, we fought and went to war and battled each other and became capable in that regard. So all along the human journey, our bodies have internalized what the environment has demanded of us, and we have developed adaptations that allow us to perform in that environment. The reason that we love climbing, that we love traveling up and down mountains, whatever it is, throwing a ball, playing basketball, all of those sports, all of our athletic habits are connected to what human beings have done for the last 9 million years. And to me, training is really about reconnecting with what we actually originally have. But because we live in the modern society, because right now I'm sitting in a chair and talking on a telephone and we've got a temperature controlled environment and we fly around the world in planes and we work on laptops and all these things, we're really dramatically losing our athletic ability that even 5 generations ago, our ancestors would have been so much more active, so much more demanding of their bodies. And yet today, we're really in this time where as a species, we're really desperately trying to get back to nature. That's why I think, we're seeing this huge growth in adventure sports. People want raw, athletic, wild experiences. People want to climb hard. They want to ski big mountains. They want to run across ranges. They want to do all this crazy stuff. That's all that's woven into our DNA. That's who we are. And training is the process of reconnecting with that because it's part of who we always have been.
I love how excited you are about it. And I love the connections that you draw to evolution, because I'm really into the evolution of our bodies, but even more for myself, at least, the evolutionary psychology of who we are and what we do. But yeah, what you're saying is more the evolutionary biology and physiology. And I think that is so interesting. The running, where does it come from? The climbing, where does that come from? Our thirst for adventure and all these things, where does that come from? And so in the end, Samsara is a online training program and programs. It looks like you have a lot of different programs for people to reconnect with all that and get as strong as they can for whatever it is that they want to be great at, whether it be an event or just life in general. And so, if you haven't checked it out, is it just samsara.com?
It's samsaraexperience.com.
samsaraexperience.com. Yeah, check it out. I'm going to do myself a program too. I've been doing some online programs that I've really found helpful, especially since I've had some knee injuries. And
Very cool.
What I need now is fitness, because I just went on a 6-week surf trip. So I got to start. I got to start all over.
We have like a whole slew of training programs for big mountain skiing. We got video programs. We got training plans. We work one-on-one and in a group setting with big mountain skiers. We've worked with, big names in skiing. Michelle Parker's been on our program, Jeremy Jones, endurance style skimo athletes, like the whole spectrum. And really what makes Samsara unique in the way that we train is that we train the full spectrum. So from endurance to power and strength, we train athletes across all those sports and all those disciplines. So please check us out, reach out. We'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, and it's impressive. The little bit that I've seen is what Zahan can do with his body is kind of amazing, is what I've seen. So I want to get to that point as well, and I definitely need that. And I'll be signing up. So what's next for you in your life's journey?
Right now, I think what's next for me is really Samsara, and that's really like my vehicle for where I'm really like investing my energy and what I'm just like crazy passionate about. I'm really fascinated by the human body and working with athletes and helping athletes transform their performance, resolve pain. And just, I think as a society, we are struggling with so much physical dysfunction that's a result of modern life. We're in pain more, we're, injured more, we have a lack of endurance, a lack of strength. And it's all connected to the fact that like we're living differently than our ancestors did. And as outdoor athletes, that's something that we can overcome, and training is the ticket. And I think that training is really about autonomy. It's about feeling like you're in control of your own life because you've got the levers to manipulate your own like physical destiny. And that is, it's very fun. It's very, very cool when you're like, maybe you're in your 50s, maybe you're older even. And you're like, oh, my best days are behind me. And then you realize like, no, if I learn how to train, like I can become anything I want. And for you young people out there, like, holy smokes, you are so adaptable. Like you could be, you can become an athlete that you don't even think is possible through training. And for me, getting to guide that process, I mean, I love it. It's so fun.
Extremely, extremely empowering. So stoked that you're doing that. I'm excited to get involved as well.
Right on.
Z, that's all I got for you, man. Do you have anything else, any thoughts you'd like to share here at the end of the show?
I think that what stands out to me is just like, it was so cool to feel your enthusiasm for diversity. Like who was ever talking about diversity in the mountains 5 years ago? Like that's not something anybody was interested in except for maybe the people who felt like they were being excluded. And now it's like, there's like real passion and real interest and like, you to be asking me all those questions and just creating that space for that conversation. It's getting to be hard to avoid. And I love that, it's like, it should blind you. It should give you a headache that the mountains are so white. That should be an alarm bell. Like anytime you're in a place that's all white, you should be asking, why the hell is this place all white when America is not? So I just love that you're creating the space for that conversation. And, it's killer, man. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, man. And thank you. Yeah. Cause it's really important to me as well. And it's something that we're really focusing on with the podcast this year. So,
radical.
And I'm stoked that you were so open about talking about it because it's not always an easy subject, but it should be, because it should be right on the front and right on the top and right in the face of everything we do.
Right on. Right on. Yeah. I'm happy to keep that conversation going. And thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Snowbrains. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Brian Head Resort. Get free lodging this season at Brian Head Resort. Stay minutes from the slopes and wake up rested to ski Utah's famous powder. This deal won't last long. Book yours today at brianhead.com. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by 11.8. Damn, it feels good to be a skier, right? 11.8 enhances the experience of freedom and exploration of the mountain with trustable gear. They never compromise when creating gear for long-term use in the mountains, whether this relates to the design process, the choice of materials, or production. Find the gear you can trust for years to come at 11.8.com.
This episode of the Snowbrains podcast was edited by Jared White, music by Chad Crouch, and I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark.